welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. This is Jessica. I am one of your hosts, and I am sitting here with my illustrious co-host. Would you like to tell us who you are?
Hi, thank you. It's Jen here. Nice to be here.
And we are here with an author who you are known for many, many books. And some of them are they called Pretty Little Liars? I don't know if anyone's heard of them. It might have been like a really big thing. In fact, it was. Please tell us who you are.
I am Sara Shepard.
Welcome, Sara Shepard. So we're not talking about Pretty Little Liars today, but there are some lies told in this book. Why don't you tell us what we're going to be talking about and where this book came from?
Sure. So my latest book is called Nowhere Like Home. And it is not a YA novel. It is an adult. I mean, it's about adults, kind of adults behaving badly. But it is very much like Pretty Little Liars. If you read Pretty Little Liars as a teen, you might like this because there are a lot of lies being told. Yes, there are some shaky friendships. There are a lot of secrets, a lot of things like that. And it is about a community of women living in the desert, trying to kind of give motherhood a go just on their own, forging their own lives. And a friend of a friend kind of comes into the situation, and, you know, she is realizing it's kind of not all it's cracked up to be. That's the basic part of this. But yeah, it was really fun to write. Lots of twists and turns, and you know, it was an interesting setting too, because what mother doesn't wonder what it would be like to just live with your friends and raise your kids with your friends?
Yeah, I love the setup because it on this, I felt the same way as, the main character does encountering the idea. I'm like, oh my, I would, yes, yeah, that sounds, yeah. like it's this sort of beautiful, I don't know, like it's like if a society worked the way it should, it would happen more, like in,
Right.
in a healthy, good way. But
Yeah, no, I just remember, I think it was probably during COVID. I think this is where the idea came about. An old friend of mine, we have kids the same age, and sometimes we were just like, we weren't able to sort of have a little pod together because we didn't live close to each other, but we were like, wouldn't it be nice if like we just went to a big farmhouse or something, and our husbands could go do whatever, and we could just like, our kids could hang out and we could weather this together. And I started thinking about that and realizing that this was not only my, I don't say it was a fantasy, but just a, passing thought. And of course, then I kind of twisted it into something a little darker.
So yeah, first of all, who didn't in the pandemic have a fantasy of living in some sort of, for me, it was like a socially distanced commune. But in this situation, it's a mommune. Now,
Yeah.
I did not look this up, and I want to talk about Lena, and I want to talk about Rhiannon and Sadie and Jillian and all of the characters in this story. But quick question, do mommunes exist? Did you do research on this? Is this a thing?
So the research that I did was more about, they're called like intentional communities, and they've existed for years. I mean, they're communes, so they're all over the place, and some of them function where they will kind of take in travelers, often college students, to kind of live on their land and work, and in exchange, for food and for a place to sleep and whatever. And then some are more long-term, like communities that are set up where this is where you live, and we're starting our own little world here. And there's a whole universe to that. it was more after I started writing the story that I realized that mommunes, I think it is starting to be maybe a thing where moms like will kind of go and raise their kids with other moms. And I mean, I hope it works for them. But yeah, I was surprised to see, I think there was a New York Times article about it, that it's, they do sort of exist on a small scale.
So I also read that article and I found it so fascinating, that we're having more and more of these sort of like grassroots, like chosen family type
Yeah.
arrangements for child raising or for aging or for what have you. But what this book kind of like made me think about is that like that does create all these sorts of new opportunities for like what is still kind of essentially like domestic thriller drama, but just where people don't happen to be related by blood, And
Right.
when you are like writing that sort of like tension, does it feel like, are there differences between writing it between like people who are like friends, even if it's super complicated, versus like blood relations? I hope that makes sense as a question. But
Um, I'm trying to think of other thrillers that I've written that have a lot of family tension. I guess I've written other ones that have sort of family tension. I like writing about friends or sort of people thrown together that become friends. I did a YA series. I mean, all of my YA series are sort of like that too. Like Pretty Little Liars, they were friends and then they weren't friends and they were sort of shoved back together because of a common enemy. And I wrote another series called The Perfectionists, where again they have sort of a common enemy and are kind of thrown together. So this is like yet another situation where people are sort of thrown together and figuring out how to get along. Um, yeah, and I think writing about, I mean, you're kind of stuck with your family. Sure, you can cut them off, but like, I don't know. I think with friends, you can kind of choose who you want to be friends with, but at the same time, it's harder to have hard conversations, I think. So often friendships are just dropped, or you let a lot of things slide where, maybe with a family member you wouldn't. So I think there are different things that I have to think about when I write about friends. I mean, I think another thing in domestic thrillers is a lot of people write about relationships and marriages and whatever and lies in marriages. And this book is not so much about that. And it was actually my editor's suggestions to make it just absolutely about friends, and not even bring like Lena, for example, her and her husband's situation and what they're going through into this story very much. So I feel like I just went in a total circle and I don't even know if I answered your question.
no, I think you did.
That's how you never.
And I think you landed on what I sort of failed to get at with my question, is that like I sort of, in my head, my expectations were like, if this were family, the stakes would be even higher. But but like it occurred to me later, I'm like, no, somehow like friendship and the sort of like, uh the fewer obligations that creates, like actually the stakes are higher because people can leave if they want to, or just, like
Right.
like I'm trying to articulate something that I feel like it's a thought I haven't fully articulated, and I apologize for that.
Oh
But
no, I think everybody in the community that Lena goes to, they want to make it work. It sounds like the dream. I mean, it's this big house. It's in this beautiful land in Arizona, a little bit remote, a little scary. And you are raising your children together, and you have all this time to commit to raising your kids and being your best self, and growing your own food and all of those things to be self-sustainable, and helping the environment and all of those things. And they want to make it work, but they've all brought their baggage. And like, that was the big takeaway that I got in researching these communities. I went on a lot of subreddits and things like that and interviewed some people. And, that's the thing that I found out, is like a lot of people come in who think that they are going to find some sort of utopia, but they haven't often dealt with the things that they're running from. And that was very interesting to me.
I think a lot of it, some of the things that I thought about, and you find out with Lena specifically, so she's brought into this community by this woman, Rhiannon, who she met during a very vulnerable time. Lena doesn't have a lot, like she doesn't have a lot of family connection, and she doesn't have a ton, and you know that she has baggage from the beginning of the story. Um, and immediately, like my mind went to, oh my goodness, Rhiannon is bringing her into a cult.
Yeah, right.
You're like, you have to sort, because you have to sort of look at these things where, like what is that fine line between like this is an intentional community and oh my goodness, now all my money is sunk into
Right.
this place and this leader is telling me, who's not a leader but really she is saying I can't leave because there's a barbed wire fence.
Right.
um,
Right.
and then but then at the same time there's this fact that also it is giving these women a fresh start, because even though you are bringing your baggage, you're not supposed to talk about your past. And
Right.
almost everybody in this story is an unreliable narrator, except maybe not as unreliable as you think, and trying to figure out where the pieces fit and whether or not this mommune is legit or if this is really a cult was part of the fun of this whole story, I have to say.
Oh, that's I'm glad you think that. Yeah, and it was definitely, I think there were drafts where I made it a little more cultish. And then I pulled back on that because that's not what I wanted to write about. I really wanted to write about the friendship between, first and foremost, Len and Rhiannon, and like I feel like I've definitely had those friends where the friend that got away, and the friend comes back in your life and gives this outlandish invitation of like, come to this place with me where like we live in the desert and this is where I live now. And to say yes to that. And also she is at a desperate point. She's lonely. She just had a baby. This is Lena I'm talking about. She just had a baby. She's got her husband, but I remember those, I have two kids. I remember those early, years of motherhood where you're just like, it's just me. And I wish I had like a whole bunch of people around me to just help me. And I think that she was kind of coming from there. And I just wanted to make it about that kind of running towards this friend and wanting to try to patch up this friendship and figure out the past and, make this connection where she doesn't have a lot of connections in her life at the moment. So what kind of person makes this decision to like drop everything and go to this place, even for a little bit of time? So I did not want to make it so much about like a cult, like an obvious cult. I mean, is it a cult? Kind of. It's kind of. But I think, I don't want to give any spoilers, but yeah, it is a fine line.
Could you talk a little bit about, to bring back unreliable narrators and sort of the shifting perspectives? Like, I'm really interested in how that can be used to like both reveal information, because like you'll shift to a new perspective when you want to learn something new, but you can also do that to like hide things. So can you talk about how like shifting perspectives help you craft twists and how you like parcel out the narrative among multiple sort of views?
Yeah, I feel like with every book it's a little bit different, and this one has one particular narrator who writes in, she's sort of a narrator, who writes in Instagram posts, who there's a lot of secrets um in her posts, and she most of all is probably the narrator where we trust the least, I think. But I think for all the narrators, you're getting kind of a different side of the same story. And you know, how that brought them to the place that they, you know, to this community. And it was kind of, yeah, it was fun to show sort of all those different sides, and it was fun to also leave it up to the reader to decide, well, which one is right. I mean, they're all kind of right, in their own misguided way. But yeah, that's, you know, it is hard. It's hard to plot multiple POVs, especially when it's centered around kind of a single story, which is, this is sort of kind of centered around a single incident, or not a single, just a series of incidents, I guess. And I feel like I wrote Lena's character first, and then slowly layered in the other ones. Because I thought her story was we sort of lead with this, and she's the one who wants to figure out this friendship and all of those things. But the perspective that came last was definitely the most unreliable, and she was probably the most fun to write because, you know, unreliable narrators are fun to write. Sort of they're like the bad guys, you know, and but it's also fun to write the bad guy characters because you know, it's just hard to imagine, like, how can you be doing this kind of, like, this is so unthinkable. But I like getting into the psychology of why they do what they do and why they think they're acting perfectly reasonable even when they're not. So yeah, it's definitely a puzzle.
I think that one of the things I loved the most is the use of social media as the unreliable narrator. You know, so the character, I don't think it's much of a spoiler, but you know, there really is in the first half of the book, because in the second half of the book, other characters come in, and there's another character who I actually really enjoyed reading, but I don't want to say who it was, because if I do, then it's going to add some context to stuff, and I want people to
Okay.
be as surprised as I was that her voice came in. But
Okay.
one of the things I really like about this use of, you know, hearing somebody's POV through social media is, you know, whether or not the person realizes it, it is performative,
Yeah.
right? Like Jillian is the person who is writing in social media. You know, she's the one who's making these Instagram posts, and she's all about mental health and wellness and her, you know, getting over her anxiety. But you're also you're watching her through both Lena and Rhiannon's gaze, but then you're
Right.
watching Lena and Rhianna through Jillian's gaze as told to her. How many followers
Followers.
did she
Yeah.
have? Like 11,000 followers or something like that. So, you know, obviously it's hard to say how aware Jillian really was of what, you know, how much performance was in this, or, you know, or maybe this is just how she saw things. You know, that's one of the things that I like the most about mixed media in writing, was that you mentioned, you know, that you know, there was a certain amount of fun in putting things together. Was it difficult for you to sort of slip into that?
Jillian's, her posts were probably the last part. I knew that I was going to have some sort of post or some sort of way for her to speak, but I didn't know how exactly. And then I think in writing, you know, and I knew that she was going to be a character who had a lot of social anxiety, was awkward, didn't know how to handle social situations. And that's like an interesting thing in itself, is, you know, is that person at the party who's being a little awkward, like, and sort of saying the wrong thing, like, how aware, or is this anxiety speaking, or whatever it is. And I, you know, it is interesting to think about. But then I think in writing, I think I was writing dialogue and between her and Lena, and it just sort of came out. She just, as I was writing, Jillian suddenly said, you know, I have a social media platform. And, you know, I was like, of course she does. Like, of course she has a social media platform, because that's how she feels you know, validated, and how she kind of gets out her frustrations of how hard social anxiety is. And so then as soon as that conversation came about, that's sort of when I knew, okay, she's going to have posts. But it is very true. And then of course, then I went into the rabbit hole of looking at people's platforms of social media, or on social media, about mental health, which is very interesting. And, you know, there's whole like subcategories of like introverts, just like that is their platform on social media. Is I'm an introvert and I am not making apologies for it. Like, this is what I am. And I'm like, oh, that's who she is. And she just took her followers on a ride. And it was sort of like, is she playing up the sort of interaction she has with these other characters and making them more into villains because of her followers, or is this an actual way that she sees things? And it was really fun doing that. And I also think it is something we absolutely see. Nobody tells the truth on social media. I love I think it's fun to bring social media into the narrative. Not that I am a huge fan of social media, but it is part of our world. And you know, it's the way that it's definitely a lens through which we see things. And so yes, it was very, very fun to slip into that. And that is how I kind of see her voice. And I feel like I could write lots more posts from her, you know, telling her her version of the world as she sees it.
It's a very organic and clever way to like portray friend drama, I think, because it makes you like a very active reader, I think, because like that's what you do when like you are experiencing your own friend drama, right? Like people send you screen caps from social media
Totally.
or from text threads, or like, you know, and like you're seeing all these conversations that you're not a part of and getting different perspectives on them. And it's just like it felt very authentic to how, like, you know, when we have debates or conflicts with people now, like you have to involve sort of like your real physical presence and also like the you that you portray on the internet, you know. Okay, so speaking of, you know, I was very interested when you said that the social media platform also like emerged organically while you were writing, because I'm curious about like your process, especially like when you are writing twists and you become like known for twists. Do you plot them out ahead of time, or do you often get surprised by your own narratives like in the writing process?
Um, I sometimes get surprised. I want to sometimes, you know, like for most things, it's kind of like, all right, I think I know how the end is going to go, and I think I know what really happened. And but there's sometimes when I will write a whole draft of something, and like this is one example. This book is one example where um I think the ultimate end, the way that the book ends, and sort of yeah, not to give anything away, was kind of a surprise to me. It was maybe not in the first draft, and the first draft was more about, there was more like husband conflict, and kind of just like just a guy in Lena's backstory, and just like there were more men in just the story. And I was like, I don't, and my editor and I both agreed, like, no men in this story. This is a story about women friendships. This is not a story about relationships or even bad men. Like, I didn't need to write that story. It's way more interesting. I think friendships are way more interesting than just a bad guy and somebody's, you know, I mean, they're all stories are interesting, but um so yeah, it was a bit surprising. Now, some of my other books I will really plot out, and they will end up as I kind of plotted, which is always like also sort of surprising. Like, okay, well, because you write an outline, and often in an outline, you know, it looks great as an outline, and then you try to write it as a book and it's not great. It doesn't make any sense. So it's, you know, it's satisfying when your outline has enough logic to it where you're like, okay, that worked out. But a lot of times my outlines will kind of fall apart as books, and I have to kind of think, okay, wait, this doesn't, what is the actual thing that makes sense here? So not that Nowhere Like Home's ending was, I mean, I hope it makes sense, but like it just was one of those, it came out of nowhere a little bit even for me too. And then I was sort of like, oh yeah, that could really work.
So kind of going on the no men thing, which worked very well for this story. Um, I did like the very small tidbits you put in about Lena's marriage. I think the thing that I liked the most about it is because you do find out in early on, Lena got married, she had a baby, which is supposed to be the ultimate goal, right? You know,
Hmm.
so one might say, well, what does she need to go back to this friendship for? Because she won, because that's what we're told, right? Like
Right.
that's the definition of living well for a woman.
Totally.
You're married and you had a baby. Um, but I did like the complicated background that you did manage to weave about Daniel and Lena's relationship, because it did feel very real. And just the fact that she would be interested in reconnecting with a friend, because you are isolated as a mother and you're isolated as a married person too sometimes, especially,
Yeah.
she didn't seem to have a lot of other people in her life. But was it, did you have, I mean, you say that the beginning of the story had a lot more marriage stuff in it. So you had a lot of context as opposed to the subtext in the first draft, is what you were saying?
Yeah, and I think I had Daniel a little bit. Daniel was more the driver for Lena to go to this community. I had it as they had a bad marriage. Or it was like Lena had a baby and he suddenly realized he didn't really want to be a father. And as I was getting more, and that's sort of why when Brandon pops up, Lena's like, yes, I'll escape for a little while. I don't know. As I was writing it, it didn't feel right. I think it was a more compelling thing to have Lena be in an okay place with her husband. Yes, a little lonely, a little isolated, not telling him everything about her past, but not in a place where she wants to like split up with him. But more about, this is a friendship. This is the friendship that got away. This is a person I was really, really connected with, and who, no matter what she would have said, I would have jumped at the chance to do whatever. Like, she had a lot of power in this friendship, and then she just left me. And I kind of want to figure out, what happened. And in a way, I think Rhiannon has more power over Lena than even her husband does. And but I didn't want him to sort of be a catalyst for her to leave. It was sort of, she had to make that decision to go, and I liked being an even harder decision and more at stake for her, that she goes and that she has a secret from him because she wants to stay in the marriage. So yeah, I mean, in the early draft, he was not as great of a husband, and there was a whole kind of backstory about that, but I kind of stripped that out and made him a little bit freaked out that there was a baby, but as like a lot of guys are, but like very sad that she was suddenly gone.
Something that I'm very interested in is like the way, like you're very good at portraying the way that like holding secrets works in a person's life and affects like their personality and the choices that they make, And rather than like secrets, when you keep them, like they don't become small, like they become big things that you have to like kind of live your whole life around, right? And so like I'm also, this is sort of almost like a complimentary question to my last one, but when you are writing around this big secret or an unrevealed past for, more than one character, I've even sometimes like, are you aware of the shape of that secret in its full entirety early on, or does that also take more clarity as you write through it?
The main secret I did know early on, because I think the thing, I think this book, I feel like all my books kind of start differently. And this book started with, what would it be like if you went to this, you went to live your dream with other moms, and and the person, that you least want to be there shows up. And, you know, that's pretty much what happens. So starting with that, I was kind of like, well, why was she the least, you know, why was she Lena's like biggest fear? And then I had to kind of work through like why she's Lena's biggest fear. And so I kind of knew that, but then there was a lot that went with it, that in the writing I kind of got to flesh out more. Yeah. And this was, I mean, I think most of my books are, I start with an idea and a kind of a skeleton of an outline, and then they become more fully realized as I write them.
This was so much fun, and the book was super, super fun. I really, really liked it. It was just like, I love thrillers. It took me a very short amount of time to tear through this,
Oh,
and I think
good.
your readers are gonna love it. Yeah, it was really great. It was bonkers where it needed to be bonkers, and it was
Right.
emotional where it needed to be emotional. I really loved it. Thank you so much for writing it.
Oh, of course. Yes, it's very soapy. But it was very fun to write, and I really appreciate your questions, because, you know, for these soapy books, people think, oh, there's what goes into these, you know, but there's a lot of thought that goes into books like this, and figuring out the emotions. And yes, they go to some crazy places, but you know, I really appreciated the kind of that you sort of got what I was trying to do.
Nice. I mean, it's like a circus act, right? Like you're keeping so many plates spinning, right? Like, and you have to pay attention to all these plates so that they don't fall before you need them to. So it's just very, very well like choreographed.
Well, thank you.
But
Yeah,
then
it's a lot of fun.
at the same time, it also reminds me of, have you ever seen those experiments online where like there's like people doing a lot of stuff, and like you're concentrating on all of the act, all of the plate spinning, right? But then you have like somebody, when you look back at the playback, someone has walked into the middle of the act wearing a gorilla costume, and
Oh
nobody's
yeah.
noticed that gorilla's been there the whole time. And then you're just like,
Yes.
oh my God, how did I not notice that? And I think that there's a lot of that goes into these books, you know,
Yeah.
with these twists and turns, where you're really like, oh, right, I should have picked up on that earlier. That was there. Like that gorilla has been standing in the middle of this act
Right.
the entire time, and why didn't I notice it? And I think that it's a really skilled thriller writer, you know, to put that there where you go back and you're just like, oh, why didn't I see the gorilla in the first place?
And you know, and while we are like throwing, you know, metaphors at you, there's also like I think a almost like a thing of like the synchronized swimmer, right? On the surface